Part 104. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1031. Chapter 1031. What a big basin. Fan Kinjao wanted to help, but Guan Pan's identity involved too much, and it was really hard for her to reach out. Fortunately, Yunya rushed over at this time, put her hand on Guan Pan's wrist, and then his expression changed, and he hurriedly asked the palace attendants to carry Guan Pan away first. Who would have thought that at this moment, Fan Swinning also fell to the ground. It hurts, my stomach hurts too. Everybody. Can stomachache be contagious? But no matter what, since Fan Swinning fell to the ground, no one could ignore her. Fortunately, concubine Yu had done enough to save her face. Even if she didn't like to see Fan Swinning in her heart, she still let the palace people treat her. Fan Swinning was carried down together. A good meal becomes like this while waiting to be eaten. Really are. After everyone was carried away, concubine Yu ordered Nanny Ying again, take all the young masters to play in the yard in front, and find more people. If the young masters have any trouble, you will be the only one who can do it. It's a question. Hearing this, Han Jingchen and others felt their hearts beating wildly. Concubine Yu took all their children away. What was she going to do? Do you really plan to rob it in an honest way? Empress Zhen 11 smiled and said, when such a big thing happens, we really shouldn't scare the children. Since concubine Yu has good intentions, I will naturally support her. With that said, he handed over King Xin and Renjir to Aunt Ying first. Aunt Ying probably didn't expect that the queen would be so proactive, and she was even more cautious when accepting the love, fearing that the queen would throw the child to the ground if she stretched her arm halfway. Seeing that the queen and the queen were taking the lead, the others couldn't say anything more. Yun Jin walked over and stood with brother Ren. Because Yan Hanbei's child was still young, he really couldn't leave it to the palace officials to take care of him. He simply carried the child and went to the front yard with Grandma Ying. Once the children had a place to go, the imperial doctor also came. Seeing this, Queen Zhen 11 took everyone back to the house where they had just been. Concubine Yu took the imperial doctor to check the pulses of the third prince and Fan Swinning. As everyone sat down, their faces looked a little ugly. No one expected that such a thing would happen. Pan Dfi was the most uneasy one, and finally she just started pacing back and forth in the room. Concubine Yu has already gone with the imperial doctor, and Yunyu is taking care of her. Concubine Panda should be calm, and calm Queen Zhengzi advised. Empress, I can't figure out why the palace man wanted to assassinate the third prince's concubine. What kind of hatred does this have? When my family gave her to me to take care of, if there is really something wrong. Concubine Panda was really scared, and her speech was a bit unclear when she spoke. The niece was just a child, and now something like this has happened to her niece. Once word spreads back to her family, how will she explain it? When Pan Yulu died, concubine Pan had some unpleasantness with the Pan family. As a result, the Pan family never sent anyone to the palace to visit her during the holidays. If she offended the Guan family again this time, concubine Pan's reliance would be completely lost. Gone. Concubine Yu has sent someone to check, hasn't she? If you are really anxious, just go quietly. I think concubine Yu will be considerate, Queen Zhengzi said. Concubine Panda got the reason and courage to go to the back to check after the queen mother's words. She quickly knelt on the ground and thanked her, and hurried towards the backyard. What happened just now? You scared me to death, Han Jingchen said, holding Fan Kinjao's hand. Fan Kinjao understood that as the only one who was still awake, he naturally had to explain, so he simply raised his voice and said, originally, the third prince concubine and I, together with Aunt Fan, were talking when someone from the palace came in. When she was bringing food, the palace maid took out her dagger and stabbed the third prince's concubine. Yan Hanbei exclaimed, It's so sudden. Fan Kinjao nodded, then looked at the queen and asked, do you still remember the palace attendant who broke the teacup before we entered? Queen Zhen 11 was stunned for a moment, and then said, it's quite impressive. Fan Kinjao then added, the person who did the assassination was the palace man. Queen Zhengzi. This is unexpected. Looking at the queen's expression, Fan Kinjao knew that the queen also felt that something was not quite right, but neither the queen nor she could figure out what was wrong. While they were talking here, concubine Panda, who had just left not long ago, came back. Concubine Lu Shu, concubine Zhang Shu and others saw someone coming in, and quickly got up and asked how the third prince and concubine were doing. However, concubine Panda walked around everyone with a gloomy face, suddenly rushed in the direction of Fan Kinjao, grabbed Fan Kinjao's wrist and asked, Princess, I want to ask you, what is the relationship between the third prince and your concubine? What is the deep hatred that makes you take such revenge? Everyone was shocked by Pan Difi's actions. What stimulated this person? Queen Zhen 11 frowned and said, what should I say? As for letting concubine Panda shout so loudly in front of me, I am still alive. How can concubine Panda treat me as dead? Concubine Panda trembled when she was angrily reprimanded by the Empress. She felt aggrieved and angry, and she collapsed on the ground and covered her face and cried bitterly. As a result, everyone is even more confused. What happened? You are talking. At this time, concubine Yu came in, bowed respectfully to the queen and said, it's hard for concubine Panda to be so angry. If I see the murderer who intends to instigate the palace people and murder her relatives, I'm afraid I can't help it. Queen Zhen 11 subconsciously pinched the handkerchief in her hand and said, concubine Yu, it's better to speak clearly. Concubine Yu nodded slightly and then said, just now, the people below me have interrogated the reason for the assassination of the palace maid. The palace lady said that she was ordered by the crown prince to attack the third prince's concubine. Everyone gasped and looked at Fan Kinjao. Yan Hanbei, Han Jingchen, and the eighth princess looked at each other, obviously not believing that the princess could do such a thing. To put it bluntly, if Fan Kinjao really wanted Guan Peiner's life, he would still need to find someone. Is it so troublesome to assassinate people? If you move your fingers a little, you won't even know how Guan Peiner died with his IQ. My dear concubine Yu, the crown princess is always kind to those around her, how could she do such a thing? Besides, this is the palace of imperial concubine Yu, how can the crown princess get involved? Yes, we believe that the crown princess is innocent. Yan Hanbei and others stood up and knelt on the ground, helping Fan Kinjao to speak. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1032. Chapter 1032 was ordered by the crown princess. Concubine Panda was almost crying now, so she opened her mouth and said, who in this palace doesn't know that the crown prince has always been at odds with the third prince's concubine? First it was my niece, and now it is my niece. Yes, Panner is pampered by the family. It's a bit arrogant, but there's no reason for the crown princess to kill her so hard. Han Jingchen and others were confused when they heard this. Although they believed Fan Kinjao, Pan Difi's words left them unable to refute. Let alone the crown princess, even they looked down upon the third prince's concubine. Concubine Zhang Shu stood up at this time, looked at concubine Panda and said, if a person looks down on concubine Panda's niece, it may be that person's problem, but if all the sisters-in-law have a bad relationship with concubine Panda's niece, concubine Panda will still have to looking for problems with my niece. Concubine Pandafi glared at concubine Jiangshu. Concubine Jiangshu is saying these things now, but is it obvious that she is laughing at me? Concubine Jiangshu ignored concubine Panda and just said to the queen, the crown princess is smart and tolerant of all rivers. Even if there is any disagreement with the third prince, she will tolerate it. How could she do it in broad daylight, Such a stupid thing. Concubine Panda was almost angry to death. Everyone is going to die, how can this be a stupid thing? Concubine Jiangshu said calmly, the crown princess is the only official wife of our Ziliang crown prince. Not to mention she has passed the marriage in the future. Even if she has not married now, she is still more than a head taller than the third prince's concubine. The third prince's concubine is a little louder, but that's all. Who would ruin their bright future for someone like that? Who is that kind of person? He is naturally a villain who is stupid and unaware of himself, and has no threatening power. Panda Fei had a lump in her throat and almost spit out a mouthful of blood on the spot. Empress Zhen 11 lowered her eyes and glanced at concubine Panda. When doing things, you must pay attention to regulations, and when you speak, you must pay attention to evidence. Concubine Panda, you are also an old man in the palace. You are talking so much nonsense, are you not afraid of losing face in front of younger people? Concubine Yu said, I don't believe it myself, but everything is said by the palace maid herself. I will ask someone to bring the palace maid here. At the same time as he finished speaking, he saw Yunyu and several palace attendants pressing the palace maid up. As soon as Yunyu entered the door, she hurried towards Fan Qinjiao and said with a helpless and worried look, although I don't know what is going on between the crown princess and the third prince's concubine, the crown princess cannot be so confused no matter what. What should I do now? Before the matter was found out, Princess Yunyu concluded that I was the one who did it. Did Princess Yunyu know something in advance? Fan Qinjiao looked at Yunyu coldly, really too lazy to make excuses with her. Yunyu kicked the steel plate with her kick, and she could only walk aside in displeasure. She wanted to see how long Fan Qinjiao could continue to be arrogant. At this time, the palace maid had been by Wu Huada, and was pushed to the ground by the palace servants. Before anyone else could ask, she took the initiative to look at Fan Qinjiao and said, this servant is working for the crown princess sincerely. Princess, but you must not leave your servant alone. Empress Zhen 11 took over the words, looked at the palace servants and said, the palace servants in the crown princess's courtyard are all sent by me. I will know if you are a person in the crown princess's courtyard after checking. The maid quickly looked at the queen and said, this slave is not serving the crown princess, but has been serving concubine Yu in the palace. The slave sprained her foot when she went out a few days ago, and happened to meet the crown princess to rescue her. I have always been grateful, but I didn't expect that the crown princess suddenly sent someone to ask my servant to help me with something last night. Concubine Yu asked, what's going on? The crown princess's people found the slave and said that they heard that the emperor asked concubine Yu to help with the banquet, so they wanted to ask the slave to help assassinate the third prince's concubine. As soon as she mentioned the third prince's concubine, concubine Yu's pupils trembled violently. She looked at the palace maid who didn't come back to her senses for a long time. After a while, she gritted her teeth and said, keep talking. This slave is afraid, but, the crown princess said that as long as the matter is completed, she will definitely bring the slave back to the main city with her. The palace maid lowered her head and said, as if she was really being taken care of. It seemed like he did it under duress. Concubine Panda angrily slapped the palace maid on the face, how brave you are. Aren't you afraid that things will fall apart and the crown princess won't be able to protect you? The palace maid lay on the ground and said weakly, the crown princess told the slaves not to panic. She said that this matter is considered to be handled by the queen. As long as something happens to the third prince and concubine Yu will naturally not be able to escape if there is a relationship, even the queen will not leave the servant alone. What a big basin! The princes and concubines naturally did not believe that the queen would do such a thing, but now that the palace maid was the best witness, how could they be allowed to speak out in defense? Hearing this, the other concubines were also stunned and speechless. Concubine Yu turned to look at the empress, and said with surprise and disbelief, I naturally believe in the empress, but now that this matter has happened, it is not up to me to have the final say. According to my concubine, it's better to have this person under strict guard until the emperor personally interrogates him. This is to bring the matter to the attention of the emperor. Once concubine Yu really suppresses the person, it is extremely likely that the palace lady will be silenced. By then, she will die without any evidence. By then, neither the queen nor Fan Kinjao will be able to remove this basin. With things developing like this, Empress Zhen 11 had already started to think about it. She looked at concubine Yu's eloquent expression coldly, and felt it twinge in her heart. Hateful. I don't know how many times concubine Yu used this method to confuse right and wrong in front of the emperor, and finally caused her to drift away from the emperor. Now she actually wants to relive the past. Fan Kinjao looked at the empress's slightly trembling arms under her sleeves and knew that the empress was losing her cool. Everyone has a hidden scar, and when the scar is torn open, no one can avoid being impulsive. I am afraid that concubine Yu wants to make the queen lose her cool. Of course Fan Kinjao couldn't watch the queen fall into the trap, so he looked at the palace maid and asked, "Since you said I asked you to assassinate her, then tell me how I arranged for you to assassinate the third prince's concubine." The palace maid looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "The crown princess asked the servant to prepare a cup of tea in advance and wait in the courtyard. Seeing the crown princess coming, she deliberately broke the teacup. If the crown princess didn't stop her, let the servant find an opportunity assassinate." Fan Kinjao felt that there was something wrong with the scene in the yard just now. He didn't expect that it was for this moment. It had to be said that it was really a carefully planned plan. What else can the crown princess have to say when she has gained both the stolen goods and the spoils? Panda Fei glared at Fan Kinjao, wishing she could rush over and slap Fan Kinjao in the same slap to relieve her hatred. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1033. Chapter 1033 is just a lie. Fan Kinjao ignored concubine Panda at all, but looked at the palace maid and said, "In that case, you can continue to tell me, what kind of teacup did I ask you to take, and what kind of tea was brewed in it?" The palace maid's expression changed, and she subconsciously looked at Princess Yunyu secretly. This was not agreed upon in advance, so she naturally didn't know how to answer. Yunyu just said, "If it's a teacup, what's the difference?" "How are they different?" "Teacups of various textures have different textures, different weights, and different sounds when they fall on the ground. There are many types of tea in the teacup. After different tea leaves have settled, the sound of the teacup falling on the ground is also different. It will have an impact." Fan Kinjao said word for word, "If we really follow what this palace lady said, there must be no flaw in the assassination. There are so many palace people in concubine Yu's courtyard, no one can guarantee whether there will be any other. The person also broke the teacup at that time. If it was a coincidence, it would be difficult to handle." Yunyu was stunned for a moment when Fan Kinjao said, "Is there really so many things to say about a teacup?" Seeing that Princess Yunyu was being questioned, the palace maid quickly said, "The crown princess did explain it in advance, but I have forgotten the name of the teacup. I only remember the style." Fan Kinjao looked at concubine Yu and said, "Concubine Yu, please bring all the teacups in the palace together with the tea leaves." Concubine Yu did not expect Fan Kinjao to go to such trouble, but since Fan Kinjao said so, how could she stop her? She could only ask the palace servants to go down and make tea. There are dozens of styles of teacups in this palace, and with hundreds of kinds of tea leaves, matching them together is no small feat. It was after all this time that Queen Zhen 11 finally calmed down. Nearly half an hour later, a dozen palace servants came in with teacups and stood looking around the room. Just looking at them was dizzying. Fan Kinjao looked at the palace maid and said, "Go and find the teacup and tea leaves I asked you to prepare in advance." Handmaid. How to find such densely packed teacups? Fortunately, the palace maid had been serving tea and water to concubine Yu, and she was familiar with teacups. In a moment, she pointed to one of the teacups and said, "This is it." Just at this time, Aunt Ying came in with a pile of fragments and handed them to concubine Yu. Concubine Yu looked at it carefully and then handed it to the queen. They are exactly the same. Empress Zhen 11 finally realized this time that concubine Yu not only had a premeditated plan, but was also very cautious. Otherwise, why would she have kept all the pieces of the teacup until now? Concubine Panda looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "Princess, what else do you have to say?" Fan Kinjao did not speak, but walked to the teacup pointed by the palace maid. After smelling it carefully, he smiled and said, "The teacups may be the same, but the tea leaves inside are fundamentally different." As Fan Kinjao spoke, he smashed the teacup on the ground. Sure enough, the tea leaves splashing out were completely different from the tea leaves stained on the broken pieces that Nanny Ying brought in. The palace maid was stunned on the spot, completely stunned. Fan Kinjao smiled and said, "I have been studying medicine with my grandmother since I was a child, and my sense of smell is extremely sensitive. If it was really my intention, I would never make a mistake. After all, this is a matter of life and death." Now this palace maid, but he is full of nonsense and clearly wants to frame him. Concubine Panda was really dumbfounded now. If it wasn't the crown princess, who would it be? Concubine Jiangshu looked at concubine Pandif's virtue and sneered in her heart. With such a brain, if she hadn't followed concubine Yu with her sweet words, she would have died without even knowing how she died. Today, concubine Yu was obviously the mastermind, trying to frame the prince. The concubine and the empress. Concubine Han Xian and concubine Lu Shu sat aside and acted as wooden figures. One of them suffered too much at the hands of the queen and the crown princess, and now they dare not act rashly. The other is that although he wants to join concubine Yu, he does not want to fall out with the queen. Concubine Yu and Yunyu looked at each other secretly. Both of them were already upset. Seeing that the matter had gone beyond their original plan, no matter how hard they tried, it would be too late. If you want to blame it, blame Fan Kinjao for having so many evil ideas. Queen Zhen 11 looked at the palace servant and said, "As a slave, I didn't abide by my duty. I actually assassinated the 3 princes and concubines first, and tried to frame me and the princess behind. Come on. Drag this slave out and interrogate carefully." The queen mother gave orders, and no one dared to disobey them. Even the palace people in concubine Yu's courtyard had to obey. But just when the palace people were about to arrest the palace lady suddenly fell to the ground. Go, and immediately after, thick blood flowed out from the corners of his lips. Such an exciting scene shocked everyone present. Did this man commit suicide by taking poison? Fortunately, at this time, the imperial doctor came to report that the 3rd prince's concubine and Aunt Fan had both woken up and that they were fine. Empress Zhen 11 simply suggested that she take everyone to visit them and leave the mess in the house to Yu. The imperial concubine's people came to take care of it. As everyone walked out together, Han Jingchen came close to Fan Kinjao and said, "You know so much, I didn't know that the sound of each teacup falling to the ground is different." It happened that Yunyu was walking from behind supporting concubine Yu. Fan Kinjao smiled deliberately and said, "What's the difference? It's just nonsense. It's because the palace maid has a guilty conscience and can't resist. So this is purely deceiving." Yunyu and concubine Yu were already very choked, and they couldn't breathe even more after hearing these words. They would rather believe that Fan Kinjao really has the ability to distinguish between broken teacups, than accept that Fan Kinjao is blind. Fake facts. So, doesn't it make it clear that they were all tricked by Fan Kinjao? Concubine Yu was so angry that her teeth were almost broken. She waited until there was no one around her, and then she whispered, "You deserved that. Fan Kinjao, that little bitch, was kicked out of the house since she was a child. Is a bastard. Some shameless means." Yunyu's face didn't look very good either. I didn't expect the crown princess's reaction ability to be so fast. Had she not just heard Fan Kinjao admit it with her own ears, she would have believed it to be true. Fan Kinjao could really hear the difference in the sound of the teacup falling. Now is the time to destroy your own prestige and increase the arrogance of others. How are you and Zeer preparing? Nothing can go wrong today, Concubine Yu asked carefully. Yunyu lowered her eyes slightly and lowered her voice to the lowest level. Don't worry, Concubine, everything is going according to plan. After hearing this, Concubine Yu's face finally regained some color. As long as the son's big things can be accomplished today, the emperor will have an explanation. As for the queen, even if you can escape the disaster just now, you will definitely not be able to escape the fire pit behind. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1034. Chapter 1034. How about you and I joining forces? It's true that Fan Swinning and Guan Pan'er got into trouble at the same time, but one was the prince's concubine and the other was the aunt. With these two identities, everyone would naturally choose to visit the former. Fan Kinjao was not interested in joining in the fun with the others. Just thinking about it, he knew that Yunyu and Concubine Yu would definitely perform a show of hypocrisy in front of Guan Pan'er, so that they could appear to be capable. Pay more attention to the third prince and concubine. Fan Swinning's status is low, but everyone knows that she and Fan Kinjao are sisters. It was at this time that Fan Kinjao chose to visit Fan Swinning first, and others could not tell anything. Empress Zhen 11 even said, "Go ahead, sisters, it's something you should see." Fan Kinjao thanked the queen, and then came to the room where Fan Swinning was staying alone. He opened the door and saw several palace people standing inside. Fan Swinning was lying on the couch and resting. When the palace people saw the crown princess coming in, they all saluted and said hello, and then hurriedly retreated out the door without waiting for Fan Kinjao to speak. Fan Swinning seemed a little surprised when she saw Fan Kinjao, but she quickly calmed down and waited for Fan Kinjao to take the initiative to speak to her. Unexpectedly, Fan Kinjao sat on a chair far away, and even rummaged through a book to pass the time, with no intention of speaking at all. Fan Swinning. Do you really think she doesn't exist? Since my sister stayed away from right and wrong in the name of coming to visit me, shouldn't she say thank you to me? Fan Swinning took the initiative to say. Fan Kinjao flipped the book in his hand without even raising his eyelids. Since Aunt Fan knows that I am here to escape, why bother asking for trouble? Fan Swinning seemed to be really used to being choked by Fan Kinjao. She didn't feel any embarrassment at this moment. Instead, she looked at Fan Kinjao carefully and said after a long while, "Sister, she has really changed a lot." Fan Kinjao's hand holding the scroll tightened, as if he didn't hear the implication of these words. It would be a pity if Aunt Fan still misses the scene when she allowed your mother to drive me out of Fan's house. Because that will never happen again. Fan Swinning certainly didn't mean this, she was referring to her dream. The Fan Kinjao in the dream is a complete idiot. She has been deceiving him for many years and has been kept in the dark. Whether it is the power Fan Kinjao gained or the man lying next to him, they are all in her pocket in the end. Things. Sister, why do you have to make fun of me? 30 years in Hedong and 30 years in Hexi. My life is indeed unsatisfactory now, but who knows who will lose and who will win before we get to the end, Fan Swinning sneered. Fan Kinjao said calmly, I think Aunt Fan is living a happy life. Even the people around Concubine Yu are able to bribe her for her own use. Fan Swinning was startled. You are talking nonsense. Fan Kinjao smiled and was too lazy to continue speaking. Just now when the palace maid said that she had assassinated the third prince's concubine, concubine Yu's expression was obviously shocked. This only proves that the person concubine Yu wanted the palace maid to deal with in the first place was not Guanpanur. There were only 3 people in the pavilion at that time. Since the palace maid's target was not Guanpanur, she could only be Fanswinning. Speaking of which, Fanswinning was also smart. Knowing that concubine Yu wanted to use her as bait, he quietly bribed the palace maid and took the opportunity to replace plums with peaches. Fanswinning waited for a long time, but Fan Kinjao didn't speak again. His original panic gradually turned into calmness, but the voice that spoke again added a hint of hatred. So what if this is the case? No one can do it now. I have to make my own plans. Concubine Yu was originally happy after learning that I was pregnant, but a few days later it was reported that the third prince concubine was also pregnant. As a result, my child it is no longer valuable, and concubine Yu wants to kill the donkey. It turns out they were both pregnant at the same time. That's no wonder. But Fan Kinjao didn't have time to listen carefully anymore. Thinking that the empress must have paid a visit to Guanpanur, she put down the book and stood up. Fan Kinjao. Fanswinning suddenly stopped her, looked at the straight back, gritted her teeth and said, "You don't want concubine Yu to have an easy time, and I don't want to let that Guanpanur overwhelm me. How about you and I joining forces? I will know. I'll tell you something, please help me get rid of Guanpanur." Hearing this, Fan Kinjao almost laughed out loud. He turned around, with a hint of ridiculousness in his indifferent expression. "Do you think I will believe you? Do you really think she is 3 years old?" Fanswinning's face turned pale all of a sudden. She didn't expect Fan Kinjao to refuse flatly. She originally thought that Fan Kinjao would be tempted. After all, concubine Yu often gave Fan Kinjao stumbling blocks in the past. Who would have thought that Fan Kinjao wouldn't do this at all? Fanswinning was obviously unwilling to give up this opportunity. "I promise you, I only want what belongs to me, and I won't compete with you for anything else. Even if there is really no Guanpanur, that position will not be your turn." Fan Kinjao interrupted directly. If concubine Yu had really wanted to make Fanswinning the third prince's concubine, Guanpanur would not be what she is today. As for what Fanswinning said, she didn't believe a word of it. Once upon a time, Fanswinning used such a sincere face to push her into the fire pit again and again, making her sink deeper and deeper. How could she believe her now? Fanswinning did not expect that Fan Kinjao would leave immediately. Looking at the retreating figure, the sinister light hidden deep in the originally innocent eyes finally revealed. She thought that if Fan Kinjao agreed, she could brainwash Fan Kinjao like in her dream, and then use Fan Kinjao to get rid of the people she wanted to get rid of. However, she thought well. Fan Kinjao Yao didn't give her a chance at all. Fanswinning tried hard to keep her breathing steady and tried her best to calm down, but it didn't matter even if Fan Kinjao didn't agree. No matter how Fan Kinjao calculated, he couldn't escape from her grasp. Fan Kinjao came out of Fanswinning's side and did not see the queen and others. After careful inquiry, he learned that the queen and others were still in the third prince's room. Fan Kinjao thought that the queen must have been waiting for her on purpose. After all, she and Guanpanur were serious sisters-in-law. If they didn't visit, they might leave something to be said. Thinking like this, Fan Kinjao and the palace man found a way and walked towards the house where Guanpanur was. When you open the door, you can see a crowd of people sitting in the room. In comparison, Fanswinning's place is really desolate and a bit pitiful. Guanpanur had woken up and was sitting on the edge of the bed, silently looking at the people around her and greeting them with care and concern. Her face was as thin as gold paper, which showed that she was really scared. Everyone saw Fan Kinjao enter the door, and what was originally a lively conversation came to an end in an instant. Queen Zhen 11 took the initiative to look at Fan Kinjao and asked, "How is your sister's injury?" End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1035. Chapter 1035. I will also stir up discord. Empress Zhen 11 specifically said it was your sister, not Aunt Fan, in order to make it clear that Fan Qinjiao and Fan Swinning were sisters, so as to block Yu Yu's mouth. Comparing sisters-in-law to sisters, it is understandable that sisters are more important. When I return to my mother, I'm fine. It's just because of the pregnancy that the fetal energy was a little disturbed. I think it will be fine after a few days of training, Fan Qinjiao said calmly. Empress Zhen 11 was stunned for a moment, and finally understood what kind of drama concubine Yu was singing. The older one beat the younger one because Fan Swinning was carrying a concubine? It's a shame that concubine Yu can do it. I just heard that the third princess is pregnant. I didn't expect Aunt Fan to be pregnant as well. In this case, I really want to congratulate concubine Yu. It can be said to be a double happiness. Empress Zhen 11 looked at concubine Yu and smiled, but this was not meant for concubine Yu to hear. Sure enough, concubine Panda, who had been confused, suddenly became excited. If she hadn't understood what happened to the assassinating palace maid just now, she now understood it completely. It was because concubine Yu not only wanted to get rid of the child in the concubine's belly, but also wanted to drag the queen and the crown princess into the water. It's like killing two birds with one stone. But the bait used was her niece. I didn't expect Aunt Fan to be pregnant too, which is a great thing. However, I am worried that the third prince may not be able to take care of her. After a while, I will take the third prince's concubine to my side to take care of her, concubine Panda said. Concubine Yu knew that the queen was sowing discord, but she didn't expect concubine Panda to fall for it. Yunyu said quickly, "What did concubine Panda say?" "The third prince's concubine and the third prince are one body, so they should stay with the third prince and take care of them. Besides, since the mother-in-law learned that the third prince's concubine was pregnant, she would not. It will be done very carefully." Concubine Panda snorted. It was because concubine Yu had taken such good care of her that she was even more worried. "I have made up my mind, Princess Yunyu, don't try to persuade me." After saying that, she looked at the nanny who was following her. "Go and clean up the third prince's concubine briefly, and send it to my yard now." After receiving the order, Grandma walked directly to Guanpaner and started packing. Everyone in the room was stunned and looked at concubine Yu subconsciously, wanting to see her reaction. Concubine Yu's face was naturally uglier than eating shit. She looked at concubine Panda and said, "Concubine Panda, what do you mean? Shouldn't my daughter-in-law stay with me? What does it mean to be a concubine? I think concubine Yu should know it better than anyone else." Concubine Panda was so filled with anger that she even forgot how to write the word fear. Seeing that her grandma was moving slowly to clean up, she simply rolled up her sleeves and stretched out her hand. "Help me organize it together. In a moment, the packaging is completed." Concubine Panda ordered the nanny to help Guanpaner and walked out. Concubine Yu couldn't hold on. She trembled and pointed at concubine Panda and said, "Concubine Panda, I think you have always been a sensible person over the years, so I have taken good care of you. Now you dare to do this? When something happens, aren't you afraid that I will report it to the emperor?" Concubine Panda sneered, "This is the best. I think the emperor will be able to understand my sincere feelings for my niece." Concubine Yu. Pandi Fi is a real tiger. Tiger is completely overwhelming. Concubine Yu thought that what happened today was spotless, but she didn't expect that she would become such a virtuous person now. If she said she didn't have a guilty conscience, it would be a lie. In addition, she was choked by concubine Panda's betrayal, and she actually watched Gwanda. Panner was helped out and couldn't even speak anymore. Yunyu saw that the matter had come to this, and trying to stop him would only make others laugh. It would be better to put it aside for the time being and talk about it later. She smiled and said, Look at my memory. The palace servant just came to report that the food was ready. Queen Mother must be hungry right now, let's go have a meal first. Concubine Lu Shu also followed suit and said, what Princess Yunyu said is that we are small if we are starved, but if we starve to the queen's body, we will be punished and deserve death. After hearing this, Queen Zhen 11 glanced at concubine Lu Shu. After meeting the queen's eyes, concubine Lu Shu felt guilty and quickly lowered her head. Queen Zhen 11 did not say anything, but stood up and went ahead. Take Fan Qinjiao out. Having seen the joke, I am indeed a little hungry. The group of people came to the flower hall, and sure enough, 2 tables had been placed inside, and the delicacies on them were still exuding a faint heat. After Queen Zhengzi sat down, everyone sat on the chairs. The concubines were at one table with the queen, and Fan Qinjiao was at another table with the other princes and concubines. If it were in the past, the princes and concubines would still have to be a little cautious. After all, there is still Guan Pan'er, but now they are obviously on their own, and it should be rare for them to relax, but everyone present knows that there are greater dangers behind etc. with them, who can really eat it. Concubine Yu naturally noticed that something was wrong with the atmosphere here, and said suspiciously, but the food is not to your liking? Otherwise, why do I look at all the princes and concubines as if they are worried? Hearing this, Han Jingchen almost dropped the chopsticks in her hand to the ground. I'm really afraid of whatever comes next. She is not Fan Qinjiao. Let alone concubine Yu, she would be frightened half to death just by looking at her. Seeing this, Yunyu's heart tightened, and she suddenly remembered the eunuch's assassination that day. It was precisely because of this that it disrupted all their plans and made her father still suspicious of them. I thought it was just a coincidence. Could it be man-made? Obviously, concubine Yu also thought of this. She looked at Yunyu and gave a silent hint. Yunyu stood up and walked to the table here. It's inevitable to feel restrained when dining with elders. It's better to be more comfortable with the princesses. The princesses won't dislike me, right? Yunyu said this, but she didn't wait for anyone to answer, and just sat down on her own initiative. At this time, not to mention Han Jingchen, even Yan Hanbei and the 8th prince became nervous. Speaking of which, I think the assassination that day was very strange. How could the palace man have been serving his father for more than 10 years, so how could he change his face when he changed his mind? Yunyu said seemingly unintentionally, but secretly he was looking at the expressions of everyone present. Han Jingchen and others were so nervous that they didn't know how to reply. We, the younger generation, can't comment on the emperor's affairs. I know Princess Yunyu is worried about the emperor, but she still has to abide by the rules, Fan Qinjiao said calmly. Yunyu was choked for a moment, and after a while she smiled and said again, what the princess said is true, I just can't figure it out. Before Yunyu could finish her words, Fan Qinjiao looked at Yan Hanbei aside and said, last time the little princess fell ill, I didn't have time to ask again. Now looking at her vigorous appearance, I think she is recovering well. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1036. Chapter 1036, Turning Suspicion into Anger. Yan Hanbei didn't understand why Fan Qinjiao suddenly mentioned his daughter, but when he thought that his daughter had suffered so much because of the mastermind behind the scenes, his original guilty conscience instantly burned with a raging fire. Children are the most troublesome when they are sick. Fortunately, the princess diagnosed the fever in time, otherwise the prince and I would not know what to do. Yan Hanbei suppressed the anger in his heart, otherwise he might really overturn the table in Yunyu on the face. Yunyu and concubine Yu were slapped again. Han Jingchen is also a mother. She has heard about the little princess's story a long time ago. As the saying goes, she feels the same way. She is also a mother. How can she not worry that her children will suffer the same fate? What Princess Pinglay said is that it is inconvenient for us to do anything in this palace. Fortunately, the princess is studying medicine, otherwise she would not know what to do when the child gets sick almost instantly. She and Yan Hanbei, the same enemy, is angry. As for what to be afraid of and what to be anxious about, what it is. Although the eighth princess does not have children, it does not mean that she will not have any in the future. Anyway, she has long wanted to learn from the sixth princess and Princess Pinglai. Now she is listening attentively and has no intention of being afraid. Fan Kinjao saw that the anger of several people present had almost burned away their original fear, so he knew it was time to change the subject. Speaking of which, I haven't even gotten married yet, and I don't even know how to take care of a child. It's inevitable that I would be with King Xin by my side during this period. If it weren't for my sister-in-law and brother Ren, I would be very worried. That's right, Fan Kinjao said with a bitter smile. When it comes to this, Yan Hanbei and Han Jingchen are not tired anymore. Han Jingchen said, children are the most difficult to take care of. When Yunjin was still young, His Highness and I could hardly sleep together once a month. Even if there was a nanny to take care of him, he still had to take care of him. You can feel at ease when you are around. Yan Hanbei also said, no, if I don't hug my daughter every day, I won't be able to sleep well. Princess Pinglay doesn't need to worry, just wait until the child is older. The sixth princess said it was easy, but who knows what kind of natural and man-made disasters may occur. Yunyu. Why are we suddenly talking about parenting? Is this what you originally said? Yunyu felt that the topic seemed to have gone astray. She tried to speak several times, but she always failed. Firstly, she couldn't get a word in, and secondly, she didn't know why. It felt like there was a raging fire burning around me. It was so hot that she felt uncomfortable all over. Seeing that the atmosphere at the princess's table was getting warmer, concubine Yu finally withdrew her gaze. She thought it was because she was overthinking. Their plan was so meticulous and seamless, how could anyone else spy on it? Fan Kinjao is smart, but it is nothing more than some cleverness. The meal was eaten in a leisurely manner. After almost half an hour, everyone got up and moved out of the flower hall. Just as they were about to walk to the front hall, they saw a commotion in the palace. Obviously something happened. Soon, someone from the palace came to report, to the queen and all the masters, there is a child missing in the palace. At this time, both Yan Hanbei, Han Jingchen, and even Fan Kinjao were a little out of breath. They asked the queen for instructions and hurried towards the front yard. Compared to the large number of guards outside, the children playing in the yard were much more comfortable. When Fan Kinjao and others arrived, they saw Yunjin, Qing Xian, and brother Ren playing with an eagle and catching chickens. The little princess was being held by Aunt Ying and following along to join in the fun. Several people looked at each other and stopped where they were. Han Jingchen frowned and said, looking at the chaos outside, could it be that the person who came to deliver the message made a mistake? Fan Kinjao shook his head, no, the messengers in the palace are all trained. If they don't really have solid news, they will never spread random messages. This is strange. Our children are all doing well here. Could it be that the heirs of other ministers' families have been lost? Yan Hanbei spoke and looked at Yunjin and others again, counting them carefully in his heart. After the number of people came, he breathed a sigh of relief. Fan Kinjao frowned, but always felt that something was wrong. The third prince needs children to make alchemy. Indeed, any child will do, but today the emperor is hosting a family banquet. The ones sitting here are the princes and concubines, and the ones sitting there can only be the princes. So it is obvious that the ministers and family members who came with them are still in their respective courtyards. Although the emperor held a banquet and there were no clear regulations prohibiting other people from entering, no one dared to really make any noise at this time, so they must have stayed in their own courtyards. According to the emperor's order, the ministers of each family brought many family members and heirs. Unless the people of Bailey Wrongs were crazy, they would let others rob their homes in broad daylight. In this way, the child is caught, but does the royal family still want to lose face? Even if Bailey Wrongs didn't want to worry about this, the emperor, who always cared most about reputation, would not agree. But if not the heirs of those ministers, who could they be? Fan Kinjao's heart started beating wildly as he thought about it. Yuanyu. Just as he was thinking about it, he saw Bai Tu walking into the courtyard with a group of guards. Fan Kinjao thought something bad and hurriedly chased Bai Tuesday. Just when she arrived at the main hall, she saw Bai Tu already standing in front of the queen. Princess Yuanyu was kidnapped by assassins. The emperor was furious and ordered the queen to quickly go to face the saint. Fan Kinjao swayed and almost lost his balance. It is indeed the first month. Everyone's eyes were instantly focused on the queen. Empress Zhen 11 was also surprised, but despite everyone's gaze, she still maintained the momentum and calmness that a queen should have. She stood up and said, "I'd like to see Mr. Lao Bai come over." Bai Tu did not dare to respond, but lowered his head and said, "Queen, please invite me." Empress Zhengzi nodded and walked out step by step. As soon as the empress left, the room exploded. Concubine Jiangshu was the first to be unable to sit still. How could the good Princess Yuanyu be kidnapped? Even if there is a fault, it is the fault of those slaves. Normally, it would have been Concubine Panda who responded at this time, but now that Concubine Pan still resented Concubine Yu for using her niece as a messenger, it was naturally impossible for her to speak out. As for Concubine Lu Shu, she naturally did not want to show off, so she sat on a chair with her head lowered and pretended to be dead. On the contrary, Concubine Han Xian sneered and said, "Not long after Princess Yuanyu was born, the queen took her with her and took care of her. She seemed to be taking good care of her, but after all, if she didn't fall out of her belly, how could it be true? So meticulous." Concubine Jiangshu said with a cold face, "Everyone in the palace knows the queen's love and affection for Princess Yuanyu." Concubine Han Xian questioned the queen like this. "Has she ever cared about Princess Yuanyu?" Concubine Han Xian's face changed, and her words became more and more unpleasant. "Now that the facts are in front of us, what else can Concubine Jiangshu do to defend the queen? Concubine Jiangshu should hope that Princess Yuanyu is safe and sound. If Princess Yuanyu really disappears, if I lose my hair, I still can't decide who will be called the queen in the future." Inside the house, Concubine Jiangshu and Concubine Han Xian were going back and forth, quarreling like crazy. Concubine Yu sat leisurely on the chair, not offering any help or persuasion. She just let the two of them quarrel, unable to hide the evil smile in her eyes. What's the use of arguing now? It's better to save some energy and watch how the queen falls. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1037. Chapter 1037. Something happened to the queen. Just at this time, Fan Swinning came out with the help of the palace servants, stood in front of Concubine Yu, and bowed politely to say goodbye. Concubine Yu frowned. "If you're not cultivating in there, what are you doing out there?" Fan Swinning said very obediently, "When I heard the noise outside, I panicked that something had happened to disturb Concubine Yu, so I hurriedly came over to take a look." Concubine Yu looked at Fan Swinning silently for a while before saying, "Princess Yuanyu was kidnapped." The emperor was furious. He just sent someone to summon the empress for questioning. Concubine Yu hated Fan Swinning, and hated her for having bribed her. She used her strength to bite the third prince's child to death. However, the third prince succeeded, and something happened to the queen. Concubine Yu's heart was still happy. Thinking again that it was Fan Swinning who suggested taking Yu abducted in the first place, Concubine Yu's anger in her heart had already disappeared by half. What happened today was that she was not honest first. If we were serious about it, Fan Swinning's belly was also her grandson. When Fan Swinning heard that Yu had been kidnapped, her calm eyes did not waver. Instead, she looked worried about Concubine Yu. The emperor has made his own decision regarding Princess Yu. As long as Concubine Yu is safe, I will be relieved. Concubine Yu nodded helpfully. You can sit down too, after all, there is still a child in her belly. Fan Swinning's actions, in the eyes of others, were undoubtedly just an attempt to please Concubine Yu, but in the eyes of Fan Kinjao, they only felt extremely disgusting. Although Concubine Yu did not explain, looking at the change in Concubine Yu's attitude towards Fan Swinning, it is not difficult to guess who was the person who proposed to let the third prince kidnap Yu. Fan Swinning has never taken care of Yu, and she didn't even take a look at Yu after she was born, but after all, she was her own flesh and blood. But in order to climb up the ladder and to permanently remove the evidence that she had served the emperor in the palace, Fan Swinning did not hesitate to send her own daughter to death. Such a heart starts and ends with indifference, and is simply worse than an animal. Evil people can really do anything. There is no lower limit at all. The queen was taken away like this, what should we do? The emperor is so angry that he will definitely not let the queen go. Are we going to plead for the queen? Yan Hanbei and others gathered together and discussed quietly, but they had no idea. Fan Kinjao tried his best to calm down, looked at a few people and said, "You stay here, help me take good care of King Xin and brother Ren, and remember not to go anywhere. Who knows whether Concubine Yu will take advantage of the chaos and let others kidnap the other children. The safest option is to stay under Concubine Yu's eyes now." After Fan Kinjao finished his instructions, he hurried out of the courtyard and hurried towards the emperor's palace. It was because she was negligent and only wanted to take care of the children around her, but she forgot to think about the problem from Bailey Rong's point of view. It is true that Bailey Rongs accepted Fan Swinning, but with such a proud temperament as Bailey Rong's, how could he be willing to admit that his woman had been given to his father by him? She even gave birth to a child. Fan Swinning has left the palace now, but as long as Yu survives for one day, it will be evidence that Fan Swinning once served the emperor. Bailey Rongs is naturally like a thorn in his side and a thorn in his flesh. I think it was because Fan Swinning had caught Bailey Rong's heart that she made such a suggestion. In this way, Fan Swinning not only expressed her determination in front of Bailey Rongs, but also made Bailey Rongs believe that she pities her even more. Even Concubine Yu had to remember her well. In the final analysis, if something happens in January, the queen will definitely be implicated. Fan Kinjao had so many unexpected things today. He didn't expect that Fan Swinning would poison a tiger and eat its food. It was even more unexpected that Concubine Yu could not wait to sit on the chair under the empress. There were many people standing in the courtyard of the emperor's palace, including several princes. When Fan Kinjao arrived, he saw Bailey Rongs kneeling on the ground, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Father, here we go, the mother must have done it unintentionally, please don't blame the mother." With such a filial look, those who didn't know better thought he was the queen's biological child. The way he knelt down and cried bitterly attracted a lot of attention around him. Looking at the third prince's sincere pleading, who wouldn't say that a kind heart is better than a biological child? Such a person can be so filial even to the queen who was not born to him. If he really sits on that chair in the future, he will naturally treat the people below him no differently. The prince was also kneeling on the ground, but compared to the third prince who cried bitterly and begged for mercy, he was obviously much silent. He knelt there like a statue and didn't even know what to say. "Prince, you are interceding for the queen. Could it be that the queen gave birth to you and raised you without giving you even half of your share?" The second prince walked to the prince's side, looking distressed. Bailey Fengming was kneeling on the ground at this moment, looking silently at the closed door in front of him. Even if he had never looked at the second prince, he still knew what kind of heart the second prince had when he said these words. It's just that I want to take the opportunity to highlight the virtuous and filial piety of the three emperor brothers. Bailey Fengming knew that even if he knew everything, he should be like the third emperor brother, pretending to kneel on the ground to plead for his mother. But in this way, it would not be the impression of his father. He got hit. Once he reveals something and his father notices it, then the real disaster will come. Therefore, no matter how much the second prince fanned the flames, Bailey Fengming knelt on the ground in silence, looking like he was about to be frightened to death, and his face was as pale as a trace of blood. From the corner of his eye, Bailey Rongs caught a glimpse of Bailey Fengming's face that couldn't withstand any storm, and he sneered in his heart. Is such a person worthy of competing with him? If he hadn't been reborn in the queen's belly by fate, how could such a timid and coward be worthy of letting him put so much effort into it? When the second prince saw that the prince was silent, he even wanted to take the opportunity to express himself in front of the third prince. Prince, how can you be so ruthless? The empress is your biological mother, but you didn't say a word. On the contrary, the third prince was suffering. He begged, and his voice became hoarse. If this is the case, how can it not arouse public opinion? This is what the second prince wants, to use the prince to raise the reputation of the third prince, so that the courtiers in the palace can see who is the person they can rely on. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1038. Chapter 1038, Stand Up for Your Man. Fan Kinjao looked at the scene and felt extremely sick in his heart. Although the second prince was obviously trying to flatter others, she knew very well after having dealt with him that he was not a very scheming person. It was obvious that such an idea came from Bailey Rongs. By using the name of building publicity for himself, he took the opportunity to test Bailey Fengming. If Bailey Fengming really knelt down here to plead for the queen, it seemed to be filial piety, but in fact it was not something that a cowardly and timid person could do. The thing is, when Bailey Rongs sees that Niduan is a small person, it is a big thing that he is suspected by the emperor. It's really a trick that kills two birds with one stone. Fan Kinjao knew that the only way ahead of Bailey Fengming was to endure. But Bailey Fengming wanted to endure it, but she didn't have to endure anything along with him. Fan Kinjao walked over and said, "A few days ago, the second highness, the concubine, slipped and fell into a well. I didn't see how much the second highness cried. Didn't she just stand on the ground silently and act as a decoration? The slave in the yard. Are you shocked? These people are different from other people who serve in the palace. They have been working as servants in front of the emperor, and they came with him all the way in order to serve the emperor better. To put it bluntly, they have been in the imperial court for so many years. What kind of people have they not seen? But this was really the first time they had seen the crown princess like this. Open your mouth and attack someone's life. Who is not allowed to vomit blood on the spot?" Baitu stood in front of the door, wondering whether to persuade him. Just as he was about to move, he saw His Highness the Crown Prince's eyes glancing in his direction. Almost instantly, Baitu turned his head and continued to look up at the scenery. Other palace residents in the courtyard saw that Manager Bai did not move, so naturally the others stood there and acted as wooden stakes. "Princess, what do you mean by this?" The second prince's face turned black. He had long known that Fan Kinjao was difficult to deal with, but he didn't expect that he would spit out a knife when he opened his mouth. "Isn't this better than swearing?" Fan Kinjao looked at the second prince indifferently. "What I said is just the truth. I remembered it wrong that day." In fact, the second prince was just like the third prince today, guarding the body of his princess and crying until he died. Tears streaming down his face, hunched over like an old man. As soon as these words came out, let alone the second prince. Even Bailey Wrongs couldn't kneel down. No matter how you hear this, it is not a good thing to say. It is better to just say that he is a beggar. Now that my mother was called in by my father for interrogation, I did so out of urgency. I am not as calm and self-possessed as His Highness the Crown Prince. Bailey Wrongs wiped away his tears and explained. Fan Kinjao has long been used to Bailey Wrongs' method of belittling others and promoting himself. He turned to Bailey Wrongs and said again, as the Third Highness said, "Do you want to kneel on the ground and cry? Or anyone who doesn't help the Queen to plead for mercy is considered a villain? In that case, why not call everyone in the palace to kneel here and cry for the Queen, so that our filial piety towards the Queen is not in vain?" As Fan Kinjao spoke, he really wanted to hold up his skirt and kneel on the ground. Of course, Bailey Wrongs couldn't make Fan Kinjao kneel down, so he could only admit it on the spot and said, "It was my lack of consideration that made the Crown Princess laugh." If Fan Kinjao is really asked to kneel down, I'm afraid that what Fan Kinjao just said will soon spread throughout the palace, and then everyone will really come to the door of his father's house to kneel down and cry. Thinking about that scene makes my head ache. It's okay for me to laugh at you, but after all, His Highness is a prince with an official position, and every move he makes is attracting attention. If today's actions were imitated by others in the future, and everyone would just kneel on the ground and cry bitterly when encountering something, how could it be so? Isn't it a complete mess? Fan Kinjao said coldly. Bailey Wrongs. Why is this not over yet? It's not enough for him to give in. Fan Kinjao came today and had no intention of giving up. Bailey Fengming needed to be patient, but she didn't have to at all. Although the more trouble she made at this time, the more it seemed that she didn't care about the feelings of the prince or the queen at all. But it is precisely because of this kind of trouble that it is more in line with the emperor's heart. After all, on the emperor's side, she was just helping to monitor the prince, so what's the point of talking about feelings? So now, it would be reasonable for her to completely let herself go. It was because of Fan Kinjao's fuss that the good impression the second prince had just helped Bailey Wrongs disappear in an instant. The princess' words were rough and unreasonable. If the future emperor really cried when something happened, an indecisive temperament may not always be a good thing. Bailey Wrongs' face was extremely ugly, but he could not confront Fan Kinjao head-on. He suppressed the anger in his heart and continued to persuade, "There is some truth in what the crown princess said, but now that the mother is still inside, I still hope that the crown princess will. The overall situation is important." Fan Kinjao raised his eyebrows and said, "I'm just a little girl and I don't understand the overall situation mentioned by the Third Highness." Bailey Wrongs was so choked that he screamed quickly, and even the next words were stuck in his throat. When the second prince saw this, he just wanted to come over and say a few words to help. Fan Kinjao looked in the direction of the second prince and said first, "Your Highness, is there anything else you want to say?" The second prince. Originally there was. But now. Gone. Even the third prince is no match for the crown princess. No matter what he says at this time, it is no different than willingly committing suicide. The courtyard, which had been led by Bailey Wrongs, finally fell into silence. Seeing this, Fan Kinjao walked to Bailey Fengming's side and pulled him up. When her fingers touched the tight arms, she could clearly feel the tightness of the owner of this body. And trembling slightly. It can be seen how he tolerated it. At this moment, Fan Kinjao's heart ached. Although the person who kidnapped the child today was Bailey Wrongs, how could Bailey Wrongs dare to attack the current princess without the emperor's permission? But the emperor is clearly the culprit and knows everything, but now he wants to question the queen and even punish her severely. This is simply a thief shouting to catch a thief. But that man, to Bailey Fengming, was his only father. Perhaps neither sadness nor hatred can describe Bailey Fengming's current mood. In the silence, Bailey Fengming noticed that the small hand holding his arm was slowly tightening, and with it, a temperature that was not his body temperature flowed into his body bit by bit. He knew that she felt sorry for him. How good it is that at least she will be by my side in this life. Bailey Rongs looked at the scene of Fan Kinjao holding the prince's arm, and felt it was very dazzling. He was obviously hundreds of times stronger than the prince in everything, but why did he fall in Fan Kinjao's eyes, so unworthy? Mentioned it. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1039. Chapter 1039, Planning for a Successor. At this time, a storm was coming in the main hall. Queen Zhen 11 knelt on the cold ground, looking at the bricks in front of her and carefully counting the lines on them. I don't know when she started to fall into this problem to pass the time. Perhaps after her daughter died, the emperor came to blame her for not taking good care of her and being careless. Or maybe concubine Yu deliberately treated her. She fell down in her palace, and the emperor came to ask her what her intentions were. It seems that every time, only by quietly counting the patterns of the bricks and stones on the ground can I completely meditate. Emperor Yongchang kept listening to the noise outside until it became quiet outside. Then he lowered his eyes slightly and looked at the queen kneeling on the ground. Queen, how can you explain what happened today? Empress Zhen 11 was silent, with no intention of speaking, and she didn't even raise her head. Emperor Yongchang waited for a long time and then angrily said, when you took Yuan with you without permission, I thought you might really pity Yuan, so I acquiesced, but I didn't expect you to be so indifferent to Yuan in private, even allowed to be kidnapped by thieves in the palace. Empress Zhen 11 still had no reaction at all. The more Emperor Yongchang spoke, the angrier he became. Don't you know that there was an assassination incident in the palace some time ago, so you have to be cautious at all times. You are in the back position but you don't look like a queen at all. You can tell yourself, how much thought have you let me put into your body over the years? Worry. Empress Zhen 11 thought about it carefully, and she really didn't expect what the emperor was worried about. Since concubine Yu entered the palace, all the emperor's thoughts have been diverted to Yu palace. If it weren't for the emperor's indifferent attitude, how could the people in the palace dare to reach out to the daughter in her belly? Later, the daughter disappeared. Fengming was only a few years old at that time. He was obviously the emperor's only legitimate son, but since he was a child, the emperor rarely saw him. Every illness, birthday, did the emperor ever have another once in mind? Now I am actually telling her that I am worried. Empress Zhen 11 almost couldn't hold it back. She wanted to ask the emperor about your face. I have sent people to track down Yunyu's whereabouts. It's better for the queen not to show up during this period. She should stay in her palace and think about it. The queen had better hope that Yuanyu doesn't make any mistakes, otherwise I will never do anything. I won't let you off lightly. Emperor Yongchang glared at the queen, looking like a father who cared about his daughter, but in reality, only he knew best. As long as he can continue to take the elixir, he will be immortal, but the queen is about the same age as him. If he appears with the queen again in the future, he will probably be criticized. But concubine Yu is different. Concubine Yu is still very young, but she is quite a bit younger than the queen. Emperor Yongchang's voice was not suppressed, so people outside could naturally hear it. It was precisely because of this that Fan Kinjao felt even more cold in his hands and feet. The emperor actually had the idea of abolishing the queen. I am really obsessed. Just at this time, concubine Yu hurried over with her people. When she saw Bailey Rongs, she pretended to ask, is the queen okay? Your father didn't punish the queen, right? Bailey Rongs wanted to repeat what he just heard to his mother and concubine truthfully, but because there were still outsiders, he could only say in a roundabout way, My father has sent people to track down the whereabouts of Princess Yuanyu, and asked my mother to shut herself up and think about her past. I listened to my father's wishes. It would be best if Princess Yuanyu can be found, but if not. Bailey Rongs hesitated to speak, but concubine Yu's eyes lit up after hearing this. The emperor finally plans to let the queen step down from the throne? In the eyes of others, this may be only a half chance, but concubine Yu knows very well that since Yuanyu has been kidnapped, and now she is probably thrown into the alchemy furnace, how can she come back again? In this case, the next queen is her. Concubine Yu knew she had to keep her composure at this time, but seeing the long-awaited power right in front of her, how could concubine Yu really be able to suppress all the joy in her heart? Just thinking about it is exciting. At this moment, the queen's voice came from inside, "I obey the decree." At this moment, concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs could not restrain themselves from showing greedy eyes. Once concubine Yu becomes the new queen, Bailey Rongs will be the next crown prince. Fan Kinjao looked at the shameless faces of concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs with cold eyes. It was indeed a good plan. He not only blocked the emperor's mouth, but also pulled the queen down from the throne. Concubine Yu seemed to have noticed Fan Kinjao's gaze. She turned around and looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "I didn't expect that the emperor would punish the queen so severely. I guess she was really angry. But there is no need to worry, the princess. The palace will definitely advise the emperor afterwards." What to advise? That's how I thank concubine Yu. Fan Kinjao really didn't even bother to say anything now. What the crown princess said is what this palace should do, but the crown princess doesn't need to worry too much. If something happens to the queen one day, fortunately the crown princess hasn't gotten married yet, so everything can still be done in time. Concubine Yu has never been in such a good mood, and she is naturally willing to talk to Fan Kinjao more. Although she doesn't like Fan Kinjao, she has to say that Fan Kinjao still has some abilities. If she can really let such a woman stay with her son, it will be a good thing. Bailey Rongs' mind started to move after listening to his mother's words. When he looked at Fan Kinjao, his eyes also gained a layer of light with special meaning. Just thinking about Fan Kinjao really being able to stand by his side in the future, Bailey Rongs clenched his fists in excitement. As for the prince, Bailey Rongs looked in the direction of Bailey Fengming. The Queen Mother's position was not guaranteed, and the Crown Princess had no ability to keep it. She didn't even dare to say a word. Such a person was not even his opponent. On top, if you are stretched to death, you will be nothing more than garbage, just an ant. The door that had been closed was suddenly opened. Everyone followed the sound and saw Queen Zhengzi walking outside. Concubine Yu put on a posture and even thought about how to sarcastically say something to the queen, just waiting to see the queen's pitiful and lost look. But just when the queen's foot was about to step out of the threshold, a loud noise suddenly came from outside the yard. Immediately afterwards, a group of people were seen walking into the courtyard, and the leader strode towards the open door of the palace. For a moment, concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs thought they were dazzled. That's fifth prince, etc. What he is holding in his arms is Yuanyu. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 1040. Chapter 1040. Chen Yaojin shows up halfway. At this time, concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs could not stand still, so they quickly followed them. Fan Kinjao was also a little surprised when he saw the fifth prince. Before she could think about it carefully, she heard Bailey Fengming's voice reaching her ears, "Brother, 3 emperors and others must pay attention to the last assassination of the eunuchs. People in the palace should not take action. Fortunately, the 5th emperor brother has been well raised in the palace during this period, and it is time to digest food." Of course Fan Kinjao knew that although the last plan would make the emperor suspicious, it would also alert the enemy. Bailey Rongs would definitely send people to secretly keep an eye on Lin Yihe, who was next to Bailey Fengming. Xiaoxian. But when Fan Qinjiao mentioned these hidden dangers, Bailey Fengming laughed it off, but she didn't ask carefully. She didn't expect that he would secretly contact the fifth prince. Let's go in and have a look too, Bailey Fengming said with a soft smile. Fan Qinjiao looked at the handsome side face under the setting sunday. It was obviously the same face, but what he showed was completely different from the previous one. This now is the black-hearted fox in her mind. The main hall was already filled with many people, including the queen and empress who were leaving and returning, the panting fifth prince, as well as Bailey Rongs and concubine Yu, who had not yet come back to their senses. Emperor Yongchang looked at Yuanyu in the arms of the fifth prince and was a little confused. What's going on? Bailey Lingyu threw Yuanyu in his arms into the emperor's arms, and said, regardless of whether the emperor was happy or not, when I return to my father, I don't know what is going on. I wake up when I came here, I heard that my father was coming to the palace. I originally wanted to visit my father, but I didn't expect to meet a few sneaky people in the town. I followed him all the way and saw those people kidnapped Princess Yuanyu. Emperor Yongchang. This is too coincidental. Bailey Lingyu showed such a coincidence. It is indeed a coincidence. Not only did Urchin rescue Princess Yuanyu, but he also caught the person who kidnapped Princess Yuanyu. As Bailey Lingyu said this, he shouted to the door. Soon, several ministers and their guards brought in a few tied-up people. Speaking of which, these ministers were indeed unaware of anything. The fifth prince rushed into the palace and said that someone had kidnapped Princess Yuanyu. How could the ministers hear this? I originally wanted to report it to the emperor, but the fifth prince insisted that it should not be delayed. Several ministers did not care so much and just followed the fifth prince and rolled up their arms and sleeves too hard. Bailey Rongs looked at the few confidants he had kept in the dark and were brought to the front of his eyes. His head started to buzz and his face looked ugly. Concubine Yu could still maintain an expression on her face, but in fact, the hands inside her sleeves were already tightly clenched. She was clearly seeing that everything was about to be achieved. Who would have thought that Chen Yaojin would come out halfway? The most important thing is, will these people betray them all? Emperor Yongchang hurriedly hugged Yuanyu. He already had a splitting headache, but after hearing the fifth prince's words, his head hurt even more. At this time, Queen Zhen 11 walked up to the emperor and took the initiative to say, if the emperor is at ease with me, please leave Princess Yuanyu to my care first. Thank you. Queen Emperor Yongchang quickly pushed Yuanyu out of his arms without even thinking about it. Yuanyu has been taken by the Queen Empress since she was a child, and now she has experienced another hijacking. At this time, when she saw the Queen Empress, she naturally became even more intimate with her. She lay in the Empress's arms and held on tightly with her little hands. Wearing the Queen's skirt. Faced with such a scene, who can say that the Queen did not treat Yuanyu with care? Looking at such a scene, Emperor Yongchang felt that his old face was hot and painful when he thought about what he had just blamed the Queen for. But how did he know that Yuanyu, who was taken away, would be sent back? If the fifth prince hadn't arrived in time with his ministers, I don't know what these people wanted to do to Princess Yuanyu. Your Majesty, these thieves are so bold and have evil intentions. They must be tried again. I beg your Majesty to investigate strictly. The ministers knew nothing. They only knew that they had saved the current princess with their own lives. Now they naturally wanted to ask the emperor to investigate the matter carefully. Only if the emperor finds out the danger involved, will they have the possibility of promotion. Emperor Yongchang was really forced to stand on the stand. He couldn't do it without interrogation this time. He looked at those people and said, tell me. Who instigated you to dare to break into the palace and kidnap the princess? Bailey Rongs almost fainted after hearing this, and immediately knelt on the ground and said, Father, please calm down. Even if this matter is strictly investigated, it should be handed over to Dali Temple. I understand that my father loves his son very much. But what Urchin is more worried about is his father's dragon body. Concubine Yu also said, Your Majesty, you must take care of your dragon body. Since the matter has developed to this extent, the only way is to take the people away first. Whether it is to find someone to silence these people afterwards or find a way to get rid of them, it is better than forcing them to ask now. Empress Zhen 11 coaxed Yuanyu in her arms and looked at the emperor and said, The third prince and concubine, you are right. No matter how angry the emperor is, the dragon body is more important. Although these thieves are unforgivable and audacious, they dare to he wantonly provokes the emperor's authority and prestige, but I believe that both the people and the courtiers will understand the emperor. The emperor's body is important, but the royal face is more important. As soon as these words came out, Concubine Yu and Bailey Rongs were in the same boat. Naturally, Bailey Fengming would not persuade the emperor. He just looked at the ministers and said, I can understand the worries of the ministers for my father. However, my father is old. If this matter comes to my father again, I can understand it's not right for the emperor to take such trouble, but please rest assured, ministers, I believe that Dali Temple will give a fair answer. Bailey Lingyu stopped after hearing this. Brother Emperor, you didn't arrest people and save them. Of course you don't know the hardships involved. This matter was just left to Dali Temple, let alone a few people. Minister, even I can't swallow this breath. Bailey Fengming hurriedly advised, Fifth Emperor brother, please don't act on your own initiative. Bailey Lingyu looked apathetic. It's not that I don't want to be sensible, but when I just arrested people, I alarmed the town below. Now I'm afraid that the people in the town are waiting for someone. Let's explain. Concubine Yu. Bailey Rongs. Emperor Yongchang just breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly he took it up again. End of this chapter.